Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of Quickcast with AFE Gaming. Joining us today is a very special guest, Prasad Paramjothi, aka StrykerX. For those of you who don't know, StrykerX used to be considered one of the best players of Singapore back in the CSO's days. Obviously, now the younger generation probably might not be aware of who he is. That's why in this special session, you can get to know him. And also, he is going to be attending DreamHack Mumbai, which is literally days away. So this is a sneak peek for you. You can get to know what to expect when you meet StrykerX in Mumbai. Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, doing good. I'm in Shanghai right now. It's quite cold. That's why I'm all wrapped up.
Well, so StrykerX, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the professional gaming scene? Before we start that, just give an introduction about yourself. Let the audience be familiar with who you are.
Sure. So my name is Prasad. My in-game nick used to be StrykerX. Used to own and captain Team Titans from Singapore. I think I started playing 2004. Played all the way until 2012. I think that's when I properly decided, I'm not gonna practice or try to play professionally anymore. Since then, I've been involved in the medical profession. I have my own clinic back home. I help people with posture, nutrition, and their endocrine system. At the same time, about 3 years ago, the founder of Zowie, who used to sponsor my team back then, Zowie got bought over by BenQ, and he asked me if I wanted to come help him out with the business side of things, possibly in the US. And so that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. Well, focused on for the past couple of years.
So even though you don't play professionally anymore, you're still somewhat into the business side of esports. You can never get a man out of esports, can you?
I try to play as much as I can still as well. I'm close to the guys in Boot Dreamscape. A lot of them were my former teammates. So I have not left the game in any capacity. I think I still watch it a lot. I try to play whenever I can, which is why I was really, really excited when the opportunity came up to come to Mumbai and talk to the gamers there, and maybe be on the analyst desk as well. So very excited.
Well, we are excited to have you here as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into the professional gaming scene? Like, how did you go from being a casual gamer to one of the best players in Singapore? How did you turn professional?
I don't know about one of the best players in Singapore, because I think in my career I've just been very fortunate to have the best players at that time in my team. I think that was probably the one. I think that's the one thing I did right, was to always try to surround myself with the best players. But for me, I think it was a very quick transition to casual competitive play to wanting to be a professional player. I was studying in Australia. This was when I was 16. Went surfing with some friends. Ended up hurting myself very, very badly. I played Counter-Strike a little bit before then, but now that you're kind of bedridden, or you're stuck in your room, I missed class for like 6 months. And I just started playing a lot of Counter-Strike, found that I wasn't too bad at it. So I went back to Singapore for holidays. I actually got together with some school friends and we competed. We, I think, did well enough to be noticed by one of the top teams in Singapore at that time, the Grudgebringers. A lot of them went on to become my teammates in Team Titans as well when I left Grudgebringers to form my own team. We went to a CPL. So I think this was CPL summer 2004. This was back when, Heaton and these guys are all, just starting out. And we saw that you could do this for a profession. We saw people saying they were earning X amount of money. This is what they do full time. And back then, esports was nothing like what it is now, obviously. But I fell in love with it like instantly. I came home. I told my mom and dad, I was like, I want to be a professional gamer. My mom, being typical mother, she's like, yeah, sure. You can do whatever you set your mind to. My dad is like, I will disown you typical Indian dad, and
Yeah,
he's like,
I was sort of surprised when your mom said that, but then obviously not everything can be hunky dory.
no, somebody had to be the guy. My mom very quickly decided that she wanted to take that role. But she's actually a huge reason why I continue and managed to become a professional player. She constantly encouraged me. I mean, sure, she always said, make sure you get school done and all of that, but she was probably my biggest fan, my biggest fan.
Well, how did you somehow manage to convince your dad to let you go ahead and play video games for a living?
I think it was when we started winning a lot more. We started winning the World Cyber Game qualifiers. He started seeing me in the newspapers, pictures with the Prime Minister and stuff like that when they would come to, open up the gaming centers, or when they would invite me to go to schools and give talks and things like that. I think that's when he kind of realized, okay, my son is maybe for the first time in his life serious about something, very serious about something. So it was a silent support. It wasn't like, yes, go ahead and do this or anything. It's very, very typical, strong, silent father type. Just kind of nods his head and kind of let me do my thing. And I'm grateful for it. It's nice to have somebody push you in that way.
You mentioned you took photos with the Prime Minister of Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, in Singapore, I think even when I was in the army, they were relatively supportive of my gaming endeavors. They would try as far as possible to give me time off when I had to go and compete. A lot of people in Singapore, they complain and just say there are too many obstacles in front of them. But I think for the most part, the government was quite supportive.
Well, that is a really nice thing to hear. Obviously, having a photo with the Prime Minister will, not just your dad, it will probably tell the entire world that gaming is not a waste of time.
Yeah, I would say it's the best education I've ever received. It taught me a lot of things that you don't learn in school.
Well, speaking of education, you did mention that you were studying in Australia, but then you grew up in Singapore and your parents are Indian. So, can you clarify that?
So my dad is Indian. Well, my parents are both Singaporean. My great grandfather was from India, and he moved to Singapore. So my grandfather is Singaporean as well. So my dad is Indian. My mom is Chinese, and yeah, that's the parentage.
All right. So you started off with CS Source when we
I
compared.
started off with CS 1.6 actually.
Oh, okay then. CS 1.6. But then, how did you eventually move on to Source? And then, what was the scene like between CS 1.6 and Source back in the day?
So I think the only reason why we decided to make that switch to CS Source, and on hindsight, it was a great decision. It wasn't actually my choice. My manager at the time, Ruben, he suggested that playing Source might be the way forward, simply because Source had a much better spectator function than 1.6. And we always knew that for any game to be considered a real sport, it needs to be a spectator sport. So the spectator component was huge. We didn't have that in 1.6, even though it was a wonderful game we played. So in 2005, WCG said that CS Source was going to be the main game. And that's when we decided, you know what? We're going to start early. We're going to get our training in and just move our focus completely onto CS Source. We didn't want to do both 1.6 and Source, even though there are still 1.6 tournaments. We gave up a lot of those tournaments. And I think that's also when you started seeing younger teams come in and try to compete and I guess try to dethrone us at that time. It was a very good time for Counter-Strike in Singapore because there was a lot of competition in different versions of Counter-Strike.
So would you still say that CS Source is bigger than 1.6?
Definitely not. CS Source was a game that kind of came in and let everyone know that 1.6 wasn't going to be it for the rest of the Counter-Strike series. Gave people that preview that Counter-Strike was probably likely going to be more than that there was more we could do with it. And so even though Source was far from a perfect game, it was still enjoyable. It was added a lot of different dimensions. the different aim, the different tactical components, it honestly kept my passion for the game going, because you keep playing the exact same thing for I don't know how many years. You can't get bored. But Source was good. It allowed us to compete at a much higher level against the rest of the world.
Well, of course. I mean, nobody can ever really get bored of Counter Strike. Be it CS
True.
1.6 or CS Source. Eventually, both of them just went ahead, skipped time, and we all now have CS:GO. Did you actually transition to CS:GO, or like did you play tournaments with it, or like back in 2012 was the time you decided to start playing?
So in 2012, in Singapore, we had a tournament. And the winner of that tournament, this was a 1.6 tournament, the winner of that tournament was going to go to Japan and play in probably one of the last international Counter-Strike 1.6 tournaments. At that time, Lurpus was actually one of our teammates. We'd been training online in a very strange way, like four of us in Singapore, and I would have conversations with him, we would do tactics, and then every now and then we'd come into the server and we'd talk about some stuff. And then we flew him into Singapore, and five of us, we competed. I still remember at that time in Singapore, we were still using 60 hertz, 75 hertz monitors, but he was used to 120 hertz. So when we played, we had to literally carry him a little bit. He wasn't also feeling very well for the tournament, so he wasn't playing very well. But when we went over to Japan and we started playing on those 120 hertz monitors, he was absolutely a beast. He was carrying us for that one. But that was the last 1.6 tournament I ever played in it. At that tournament, they were also having the first ever CSGO tournament in Singapore. And we decided to try and take part in it. We did terribly. I thought the game was absolutely awful. I still remember we played against Splashkey, who was like just an absolute kid at that time, but he was already quite good at the game. And he was playing under the Dreamscape banner at that time as well. I think we lost to them. And I looked at the game. I didn't enjoy it very much, and at that point, I guess I was also moving on to different parts of my life. So I said, "I'm done. I'm not playing anymore."
So basically, the transition to CS:GO was the time when you decided to hang up the mouse.
Yep, pretty much.
Okay. So I mean, back in those days, Titans were regarded as the best in Singapore. Which other teams in Singapore and in Asia, to be honest, were really top teams that could give you a run for your money?
Honestly speaking, there were no teams in Southeast Asia that were competing with us at that time. We would do practice matches, and it would just be, there would be no point. We would set goals for ourselves. We wouldn't buy armor to play against some of the teams.
Oh, it
We
was
would
that
consider, we would consider, anything more than 3 rounds as a loss. We would play against a team that was famously known for hacking, and we would purposely play with them, especially on Nuke, just so that we got better at it. I think we have to thank them for some of the Nuke performances that we ended up having. Some of the bigger international teams, mostly on D-Nuke, simply I think because we had gotten so used to not staying in positions, knowing walls a lot better because we played with cheaters. But yeah, that's how bad it was. The only teams that we honestly always wanted to play with were Tyloo or WNB and We Made Fox. Those were the teams that we always had to beat in order to consider ourselves like the best in Asia. And we never ever did that consistently. They were always much better. Also because of the fact that they could practice against each other all the time.
So they could practice with each other all the time, but you could not. Was that because of some sort of ping difference?
Yeah, that was a ping issue. They could play like ping. It wasn't like how it is now. For us to connect to them, it was easily 150, 160, and it wasn't playable. These days with CSGO, even with 100 ping, you can still shoot a little bit because of the interrupt settings. They do help a little bit. But back then, it was just unplayable.
So no chance to practice, and the teams that you actually wanted to play against, you couldn't really practice with them. But the rest of the teams which were available for you in practice in Singapore or in Asia, they were not even worth beating.
I wouldn't say not even worth beating. Like I don't want to take anything away from teams, but being very brutally honest, we were probably the only team that practiced Monday to Friday, had regular schedules, did regular, strategies, and were a professional team. Nobody else was a professional team at that time, so I can't blame them for not being able to put in the hours. And for the record, when I say professional team, which a lot of people like to use that term these days, a professional team is a team that can live off what they make from gaming, not just like a supplementary income or something like that. I mean, we lived off what we made.
Hmm. Well, getting paid to play video games, that's the ultimate dream. And
Yeah.
not a lot of people could actually live up, fulfill their dreams like you were doing.
I was lucky. I was very fortunate. So, these days it's nice to see that a lot more people are getting into that, not just in Counter-Strike, all sorts of games.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting to know. But how would you say that the scene has aged now? What do you have to like from back then? The scene was a bunch of teams, not that many, smaller prize pools, and not a lot of reputation. Not a lot of fame in being a gamer as there is today. How do you think the scene has aged?
Oof, good question. Um, I think considering what's available to gamers these days, the scene is very underdeveloped. I think with all the money that is being thrown around for tournaments and people wanting to pick up teams,
Right now?
I think, yeah, like right now, I mean, back then we would have one league a year, maybe. These days you've got an online tournament every other week or weekend. You go online and you find a game, regardless of the quality, you find a game in like 5 minutes. Back then, finding a game was a very tiring, difficult thing. I compare it to writing an actual letter versus writing an email. It took a lot of effort
Oh,
to get games going. Um, so I think the scene could be far more competitive. I think players are, as much as I hate to say it, a lot lazier. You have access to YouTube, VODs, anything you want to learn, you can learn just by watching it in an instant. Back then, you had to figure most things out yourself or go through a very difficult demo process just to learn the simplest things. It's, yeah, I know I sound like an old man, like, oh, you youngsters these days, but I still compete, and if I can pick up a new smoke or learn something new just by going on YouTube, I would expect players who are playing day in and day out to be, God, 10 times, 20, 30 times better than an old guy like me. But that difference in level between the average player and the professional player in this region, it's not as big as it should be.
oh. So you are trying to say that the players these days have it a lot easier than what it was back then, and
I
more people have the resources to actually go pro and play for a living.
They do. They just expect a lot. Back then, our people always would ask, how's it you guys get sponsorships and you guys are able to go out there and do all of this? We always did this thing where we tried our best to provide way more value in return for what we were asking. So we would always walk into a meeting or anything, and the first question would be, what can we do for you? What can we do for you? Oh, that's what you want. What more can we do for you? And it was the same with our practice. We would try to push ourselves as much as we can, even if it was simply to earn like, I don't know, $50 or $100. Like, we didn't really think that, oh, we're not being compensated fairly, or oh, they're asking too much from us or anything like that. For us, we always knew there was something more to aim for. Whereas these days, like, I hear players talk about their contracts. I'm in Discord channels or with friends who are still playing, and you can hear them talk about, I'm not getting enough money, or getting paid a lot more, this and that. I think there's just a lack of gratefulness in the scene these days.
I understand what you're trying to say. So basically, they have all the power they need. They had much more power than you ever had, but they're still not appreciative of it enough.
Yeah, I would say that. That's a very fair way of putting it.
Hmm. So, which teams and players do you appreciate now? Which teams are your favorites? Which ones do you support?
Wow, that's a good question. I have a lot of friends that are saying the guys at NIP, we go way back. Neo, we go way back as well. I love watching the old guys play. Taz, all these guys, we're all good friends. We talk regularly and try our best to give each other support because we're all still in the esports industry after so many years. And I feel for them the most, obviously. I think it's amazing that
you can relate to them because they are all players.
It's not just that, the fact that they can still hang at this level with the hundreds and thousands of other young guns out there that are trying to take their spot, that are trying to beat them in every practice match, who are trying to just say that, hey, I took a game off so and so. The fact that they're out there still working that hard, I think it's absolutely incredible. To try to be a pro gamer for 1 year itself, that's hard as it is. You give up so many things, but to do it this long and still be among the top 20, 25 teams in the world, I think that's amazing. I think right now the team that plays the best Counter-Strike, I think everyone agrees, boring or not, is Astralis. But I think when it comes to work ethic, that would go to the old guys.
Well, that's interesting. But I do know that you did try to play a couple of CSGO tournaments in 2016 and 17. How was the experience?
It was good. I think at one point I did try to compete professionally again, or sorry, semi-professionally again, together with guys like Moxie, Insanity, Alex, YSK, these guys, and it was going all right. These guys, when we first started playing, had very different basics from what I was brought up with. So it was a long meshing period to try to get the new and the old working together. The tournaments that we played in, we were just usually practicing a lot of stuff. We were just trying to lay the groundwork for a much longer team career. That said, after a while, the time and effort that we were putting in versus reward, we couldn't justify that anymore. So we put an end to that. And the guys went on to have more careers, like Alex is coaching for Boot DS, Moxie, Tom, they're both in Boot DS as well. He's off coaching in Thailand right now, actually. He just, that was just announced. So all these guys, they're, this thing suddenly went off. Okay, there we go. I'm glad to see that they're all still involved in Southeast Asian esports at a high level. The tournaments that we played, they were super fun. Some of the most fun I've ever had, and I think we did relatively well in beating teams like Greyhound and stuff like that. It was fun, and especially for a guy like me who would come back in for a month in practice and then have these guys carry my ass through a tournament. It was fun.
What are your thoughts about the current Boot Dreamscape lineup? And what do you see for them in the future of Asian Counter-Strike?
Well, it's interesting you should ask this question. I did tell the guys that I was going to do this podcast with you and that I would be asked this question. And I'm privy to a lot of stuff that goes on in the team, obviously, because they're my friends. And I promised them I wouldn't say too much. But everything that I said earlier about teams in Southeast Asia, that applies to them as well. They should be, in my opinion anyway, the best team in Southeast Asia, but they're not. They're very inconsistent, and there are a host of other problems. But I think it's a good segue for me to also announce that next year we'll be restarting Team Titans again. Obviously, I won't be playing.
You got me excited for a second.
No, I won't be playing. I'll be involved with the team, of course, as an owner, maybe as an analyst of sorts for them. But we have planned to start it in April next year, and it will most likely be a full Singaporean lineup. But the team will be based in Poland. so that they can practice against in Poland. Yeah, so that they can practice against the best European teams. Get just that's always been the thing. Being in this part of the world, you don't get to have best quality matches. It was a problem for us back then in Titans. It's still a problem now, which is why the European teams, at the end of the day, they're always able to grind out results against the Asian teams because they get to play these high quality games every single night. Whereas, back then we would boot camp and play like 3 high quality games a year as opposed to them playing 3 high quality games a night. So we want to make sure that this new lineup, they get every advantage, and we'll be focused obviously only on one game, only on Counter-Strike, because that's the game that we know, and we'll have a support staff that will likely be more than the number of the players, because I think the players should focus on doing what they should be doing, which is playing the game, and everything else, skills, grenades, strategy, that should be taken care of by other people, so that their loading is much less and they get to focus on doing one thing at one time. So that should be starting sometime in April next year.
So you are not just bridging the gap of getting the Singaporean teams back into the game, you're also trying to make sure that the European teams do not have an edge over the Asian teams. I actually wanted to ask this question. A lot of people do regard European teams to be better than Asian. And you did mention that one of the reasons why they are better than us is because they get to have all these high quality matches. What other factors are there other than having regular practice? Are there any other factors, or it's just the lack of this thing?
I honestly think that would be the main difference. The Counter-Strike is a game about problem solving. Everything that happens in every minute of the game, from round to round, or from early game, mid game to late game, it's all about problem solving. And when you compete at that high level and you're able to take the time and play these different games all the time, you're able to practice things that you spot. You see a problem, but you need to apply the solution and make sure that's the right solution. In Asia, even if you're like a huge thinker, even if you break down your game and watch it all the time, for you to test and know that your solutions to a problem in the game are effective, it's very hard. And are they only effective at this level of Counter-Strike? Are they going to be effective with much better players? You just can't be sure. Whereas in Europe, you get to test this a lot more often against high-level options. So when you come and play against an Asian team that might have 1 or 2 solutions to what you're doing, you're going to have like 6 or 7 comebacks simply because you're a European team.
Well, that's interesting. Now we know the difference between European and Asian teams. Let's lower the scale down a little. What do you think about the Indian scene, and how would you compare it to the Singaporean scene?
I think back when we were competing, the Indian scene was much weaker than it is now. It was also dominated, I think, by the guys from Brutality, and they were probably the only team that we ever met in any tournament, really. But I think these days there's a lot more competition, but I think there's also this case of being content with being the best in India. This is my personal opinion. I'm not ragging on anybody. It's just a general impression. I've gone to a lot of tournaments, be it with Zawi or just simply as a visitor, and I see that the Indian teams put in the work. There's a lot more professionalism these days, with proper coaching, people, being able to train in gaming houses. But at the end of the day, when I look at social media, which I hate, by the way, but when I look at social media and I see what the teams are happy about, the results, I think they're a little too easily excitable. You should be the best in your country. That should be a given. Then you need to be the best in your region, and then you can go on and be the best in the world. But I think a lot of teams, and it's not just them actually, it's not just Indian teams, but in every country, every team seems to be content with just being the best in their home country. And I think that's a very dangerous attitude to have.
So you're saying that they're satisfied with being the big fish in a small pond. They're satisfied with being the best in their country, and they should be hungry for more.
Absolutely.
Well, That's an interesting statement. What do you think, other than just being more hungry, what can Indian teams learn from the other teams in Singapore or teams in Europe or anywhere in the world that they are doing?
I don't think there's any one country to particularly emulate. I would say this about some of the teams more recently, like TNC, for example. They recently got put together, and I think they've improved very, very quickly. MVP as well. I remember when they started, they weren't very good. Obviously, they've had a change in players over the past year and a half, but their work ethic, in my opinion, is what sets them apart. They might be a little bit more predictable, they might be a little more together, but the fact of the matter is they are more consistent than any of the other teams from, say, Singapore or India, simply because I think of their work ethic, the way they approach training and the way they approach the game. So I think if it's one thing Indian teams could look at, it's never be satisfied. Always keep telling yourself. I think I always used to tell this to the boot guys and to my friends as well. You have to have that very delicate balance of thinking you are the shit, like you are the best thing ever for this game, but also realize that if you stop playing tomorrow or something bad happened to you, nobody's going to care. You need to have that arrogance, but also that humility at the same time. You need to have that balance. And it's the same thing with work ethic. You need to work hard all the time, not just assume that you've done so much or you've achieved something. There's plenty of time for reminiscing how awesome you are when you're tired.
Hmm. Well, that pretty much sums up what I wanted to find out about the Asian scene in general. We are approaching the end of the podcast. Just a few more questions. So, what's next for you? Like, what's next for StrykerX in life? I know that you're currently working for Zawi, and you somewhat answered this question already by telling us that Team Titans is getting a revamp.
Mhm.
So, anything else?
I think for next year, that's going to be one of the other things with that I'm doing specifically with Zawi is this thing called Divina. So Zawi Divina is an initiative by the original Zawi team, members of the Zawi team. So the guys responsible for making your mice and mouse pads. We have always felt that women in esports were not getting the recognition and respect that they deserve. So
I agree. Absolutely.
we have relaunched Divina. I'm actually in Shanghai right now because we're doing a Divina PUBG tournament. So we've gone around, tried to pick the best 48 players from around the world. We picked them based on skill. Some countries like Thailand and China, we did qualifiers. We've brought them out here, and we want to show the world that female competitors are just as good as, if not in some cases better than the men. I remember playing Counter-Strike 1.6 with this player Mel, who played for the girls team of GBR. She was better than a lot of the guys. She was absolutely fantastic, actually. But because there were female tournaments for them to play with at the time, she never jumped in and played with the boys, although I would have easily taken her on my team at any time. So it's something that is very near and dear to all of us, and that's also something that we're going to be working on next year. Who knows, we might do a degree in a Csgo, we never know.
Well, that's really exciting to know. Just one last question remaining. Are you excited about DreamHack Mumbai? And what are you expecting over there? What are you looking forward to?
I've been to a lot of DreamHacks with and I've been to a lot of countries because of esports, because of tournaments. But it's actually blown my mind that I've never been to India for esports. So this is going to be. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to seeing old friends. Guys from AFK Gaming, So Strong, Harley DSN. He's going to be there. I haven't seen him in a bit. I think the last time I saw him was at Extremes Land, also in Shanghai. So I'm just really looking forward to catching everybody, and I'm excited to see what the Indian, crowd is like. I have seen it in videos. People keep telling me that Indian players are super passionate. When you come to land, there's nothing quite like it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I might try to jump into the BYOC and see if I can get a game or two in as well.
Well, people would definitely love to play with you. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, was StrykerX for you. Don't forget that he is going to be there in DreamHack Mumbai, which is literally just a couple of days away. So thank you all for watching this, and also you can catch him live at DreamHack Mumbai. Also, just for you, the other people who are attending DreamHack DSN, we have an interview with him as well. In fact, we've already done it. You can check it out on www.afkgaming.com. Also, we have done an interview with the captain of Boot Dreamscape Impression, who also happens to be one of the best friends of StrykerX. So you can check that out as well. And stay tuned. We will bring you more content about DreamHack Mumbai, and we will see you on LAN. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.